Welcome to the module on task-oriented interactions in Microsoft Teams with messaging extensions. Hi, I'm Andrew Connell. I'm a Microsoft MVP in the area of Microsoft 365 development. I have a lot of experience with SharePoint development, Microsoft Graph, Microsoft Teams, developing add-ins for Microsoft Office, as well as developing applications for Microsoft Identity, including Azure Active Directory. This video is the first in a series of videos on this Microsoft Learning module. This video is also part of a playlist that includes all the videos that are associated with this module so you can watch them in order. The playlist and all its included videos are associated with a Microsoft Learning module that includes hands-on lab exercises and additional resources. Check the notes for this video and the associated playlist for more information and where to find the Microsoft Learning module. Okay, let's get started. Users can interact with your Microsoft Teams app through buttons and forms in the Microsoft Teams client. Messaging extensions enable users to execute search queries or trigger actions in external systems. The results of these actions are sent from your custom web service to the Microsoft Teams client as embedded web pages or richly formatted cards. A messaging extension consists of a web service that you host in your Microsoft Teams app manifest that defines where your web service can be invoked from in Microsoft Teams client. They take advantage of the bot framework's messaging schema and secure communication protocol, so you'll also need to register your web service as a bot in the Microsoft bot framework. In this section, we're going to learn what messaging extensions are, what scenarios where they can be used, and the different types of messaging extensions available to developers. This unit will also focus on one type of messaging extension, the action command. The action commands allow you to present your users with a modal pop-up called a task module in Teams to collect or display information and then process their interaction and send the information back to Microsoft Teams. We're specifically going to do an overview of messaging extensions, then we're going to look at action commands and how to create action commands in this section. So what are messaging extensions? Messaging extensions allow users to interact with your web service through buttons and forms in the Microsoft Teams client. They can search or they can start actions in an external system from the composed message area, the command box, or directly from a message. You can then send the results of that interaction back to the Microsoft Teams client. Typically, you'll do this with a richly formatted card. So what kind of scenarios do messaging extensions enable? Well, one example is that a user needs to do an action in an external system and have the results added to the conversation. For example, when two employees are chatting about a customer issue, it can be helpful if the customer's history or issue details are added to the conversation timeline from data in an external bug tracking or CRM system. Another example is when you need to complete a complex task or one that involves multiple steps and share the results. For example, consider a user that wants to request approval for a business trip. This involves finding a flight, a hotel, and transportation options. After finding the wanted options, they need to submit an out-of-office and expense approval request to their manager. A messaging extension can be used to guide the user through the wizard experience to collect information and then use that to start an approval process and display a summary of the conversation. Messaging extensions are registered in your custom Microsoft Teams app manifest that specifies where the extension can be invoked from in the Microsoft Teams client. There are 3 locations that can invoke a messaging extension. The command box is the area at the top of the Microsoft Teams client. The composed message box is the area at the bottom of a one-to-one or a group chat and at the bottom of a conversations tab in channel. The messages more actions menu is accessible from the 3 ... when you hover over a message in a conversation. Messaging extensions are implemented as web services registered as a bot using the bot framework. When a messaging extension is invoked, Microsoft Teams will call your web service via the bot framework's messaging schema and secure communication protocol. And while you can create the messaging extension web service by hand, you can also use the bot framework's SDK that simplifies implementing the protocol and expected messaging types that are sent from the bot framework. While messaging extensions are registered using the bot framework, you don't need to register the bot in the Microsoft Teams app manifest file. Creating a messaging extension in the app's manifest file enables Microsoft Teams to expose the customization as a messaging extension, not as an installable bot. A messaging extension can have up to 10 different commands that are registered with it. Each command defines a type of a messaging extension that it supports and the locations within Microsoft Teams client where it can be invoked from. When the messaging extension is invoked, Microsoft Teams will send, via the bot framework, an HTTPS message with a JSON payload that includes all relevant information. Your web service will respond with a JSON payload via the bot framework that informs the Microsoft Teams client what interactions to enable next. Microsoft Teams supports two types of messaging extensions: action commands and search commands. Action commands allow you to present your users with a modal pop-up to collect or display information. When a user submits the form, your web service can respond by inserting a message directly into the conversation or insert a message into the compose message area, allowing the user to submit the message. A search command is going to enable the user to search an external system from the command box or a compose message box. Action commands can be triggered from the compose message area, the command box, or from a message. When invoked from a message, the initial JSON payload is sent to your web service is going to include the entire message that it was invoked from. The modal pop-up triggered by the messaging extension is implemented as a task module in Microsoft Teams. Task modules, when triggered from an action command messaging extension, can be implemented in one of the following three ways: as an embedded web viewer, which is just an HTML page that developers have complete control over the UI and controls in the task module. An adaptive card simplifies implementing the UI, but it provides less control over the UI, formatting options, and available controls. And then finally, the messaging extension in the app manifest includes a list of static parameters that can be used to render in the task module, but developers have zero control over the formatting for or the UI of this option. The last option for implementing a task module, which was the static parameters, that is very unique to messaging extensions. Now, if you use either of the embedded web view or adaptive card options to implement your task module, your web service must respond to the invoke event from the user with the task module that the Microsoft Teams client will render for your user. Now, to register an action command messaging extension, you're going to add it to the Compose Extensions Array property in the Microsoft Teams app manifest, as you can see here. The type property specifies that this is an action command. The context property defines where the messaging extension can be invoked, and the fetch task property should be set to true when implementing the task module as an embedded web view or an adaptive card. Otherwise, set it to false when you're using a static list of parameters. After registering the messaging extension, you need to decide how the final message will be set. For example, will the final message be inserted into the compose message box, or should it respond directly to the conversation? If you respond directly to the conversation, you'll need to also register your messaging extension as a bot. This option will also allow you to update the response because the reply was initiated by the bot. If you aren't using the static list of parameters to implement the task module, you'll need to create and return a task module from your messaging extension's web service. The bot framework will send an activity object to your web service of type compose extension/fetch task, as you can see here, with the command ID that you need to respond to with the task object. This code that you see here on the slide demonstrates a messaging extension web service that's implemented using the bot framework SDK, and it responds when an action command has been invoked. This example implements the task module using an adaptive card. The method handle Teams messaging extension fetch task is called by the bot framework SDK when a message of type compose extension/fetch task is received. Now, when a user submits a messaging extensions task module, the bot framework will send another activity object to your web service of the type compose extension/submit action with the command ID and the parameter value set. You've got multiple options when receiving this message, including to have no response. You don't have to respond with any feedback to the user, such as when the submission triggers a long-running action. You can also respond with another task module as part of a multi-step interaction. You can respond with an adaptive card that the user can interact with or insert into a message. And then you can also respond with a card that is added as a reply to the message, enabling a bot to update the message in the future. The code that you see here on this slide demonstrates the messaging extension web service that's implemented using the bot framework SDK, and it responds with a card that is either added as a response to the message or is added to the compose message box. The method handle Teams messaging extension submit action is called by the bot framework SDK when a message of type compose extension/submit action is received.